Hello, welcome back. Ryan and Cars. Sporty versions of boring cars. I've said this before in videos, and just wait a sec. I just want to kind of clarify what I'm talking about. I'm guessing most people get this, and some people don't. Uh, Currently, it is the second week of August. I think I have videos still coming out till like September. So I'll fit this in wherever I can. I do not like how the camera is. Let's do that. Sporty versions of boring cars. I did not grow up during the time of the hot rods. The 50s, 60s, even the 70s. But I think it was mostly the 60s, I think, where even the 50s, but I think it really caught on in the 60s, where hot rods were a thing. And now, what was a hot rod? Okay. They usually took some run of the mill family car and put a big motor in it. And it became something that people would love to buy because it made big horsepower and you could have all kinds of fun in it. But I'm talking about North America, and hot rods usually refer to, Dodge, Plymouth, Oldsmobile, Ford, Chevy, the big three. The big three. And it was a new thing. It was a new thing because before that, I think you had to buy a fancy car with the big motor, kind of like modern day. Well, not even a big motor nowadays. But you used to have to buy, if you wanted a souped up version that nobody else was driving, you had to pay the high price for all the luxury items. And that usually included a big engine. However, something happened in the 60s where you didn't have to pay for all the frills, but got a bare bones family car, or their version at the time of an economy car, with a and then buy a big motor and put it in, and then the equivalent of modern day tuning happened, where they would put on tires and things like that, and four barrel covers or six barrel superchargers, things like that, and cut out the engine to fit all of this in, and then drag race them and have fun in them, things like that. But from the factory, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. From the factory, you could buy a bare bones family car, let's say a Chevy Nova, and buy a big block V8 and put it in the front of it. And the results were legendary. Sought after cars nowadays. But really, what it was manufacturers saying, hey, driving enthusiasts, you know what you can do? You can bypass all of that profit that we want. And here's a fun car. We just want to get it out the door. Boom. And then you'd have some teenager in a big block, something or other, mounted in a tiny little car. They started to get badges for that. And you could get, Pontiac GTO, You could get they did, but really it wasn't a thing at the beginning. It was just go into the dealership. There was a thing called custom, and then you would order some bare bones car and order the big engine to go in it. Some of them learned to put bigger tires on, that sort of thing, from the factory as an option. However, that wasn't the mainstream thing. It was just a bare bones car, and instead of getting the six cylinder, you got this big block something or other. And what would happen is with the skinny tires and things like that on the car, right from the dealership, you could lay strips from stop signs. Okay. By the time I got a hold of cars, it was the 80s. The big three weren't doing that kind of thing anymore. However, the Japanese were offering that. I quickly learned you could go out and buy, a Toyota. We'll just say Toyota. A Toyota and a Honda, those were pretty much staples. But they would, you could go buy a Honda Civic, you could go buy a Toyota Corolla, bare bones, but then you could buy this version of it that was a GTS or an SI, and it would have upgraded suspension or a little, dual carburetors in the motor. You know, motor is the same size, but it would enhance performance in other ways. We wouldn't have this loppy floppy thing. You would now have a set, stable car to build from factory. And then the tuner culture happened, right? American stuff was hit or miss and one offs. It wasn't consistent. However, the Japanese were during the 80s and early 90s. Toyota AE86 for you folks out there. But there wasn't just the Corolla. There was the Celica, there was the Supra, there was the Honda Civic, which was absolutely fantastic. There was Nissan really didn't. Well, the 200SX, the 240, yeah, the 240, they brought that out. Like the thing here is that I grew up where hot rods became four cylinders. They weren't the big block V8s anymore. And all those cars that I just talked about were from the manufacturer a stable platform to build from, which is what the old hot rods did, right? Like you could have this boring car, but get this sporty thing added to it, and then boom. So yeah, the four cylinders are the modern day hot rods. So like I bought a Dodge Hornet here. It's 2020. It's a 2023. It's now 2025. And when Dodge introduced this into their hot rod culture of Hellcats and things like that, it didn't go over well. And I get it, and I do because it's doesn't fit the boomer mantra of a hot rod. However, my generation, Gen X, it fits the bill because it's a 2-liter motor. Now, 2-liter motors became the standard of rally class E. Anybody who's a car person knows exactly what I'm talking about. And it was very rare to find a 2-liter motor in cars. Usually you just had a 1.6 and it either had single overhead cam or dual overhead cam. You either had 8 valves per cylinder, 16 valves per cylinder. And you were always looking for the 16 valves. You were always looking for the dual overhead cam, stuff like that for these little 1.6s. However, there was things like the Dodge Colt, which was a Mitsubishi 2000 GTX, where you could get a 2-liter motor in it, but it was very rare. The standard became, what was it? The Subaru Impreza, where they just sold it en masse here in North America with a 2-liter motor and a turbo. And that just cleaned it up. That cleaned up the horsepower wars until post pandemic. Now everything's got a 2-liter motor. If you want a big engine car, it's a 2-liter. Otherwise, you're in some 1.5 or 1.3 with the turbo. And hey, those have been epic, like the Ford Fiesta or whatever it's called, right? Yeah, I think that's what it is. Even the Ford Focus. But I mean, big engine wasn't the thing. However, what I noticed between big block fantasy days of hot rods and the modern equivalent of 1.6 to 2 liters, you're pushing 100 horsepower per liter in modern cars. Up until now, post pandemic, where that exceeds that. But coming up into pre pandemic, there, cars should be, think about this, cars should be per liter pushing 100 horsepower per liter. I'm Canada, so we speak in liters. We can speak in cc's, but it doesn't really matter. So when I hear a big block something or other is 6 or 7 or 8 liters, I think that thing should be pushing 6, 7, 800 horsepower. And it's not the case, right? Now, kind of is. Well, when I hear a 7 point something liter American V8 and it's pushing 300, 400, maybe even 500 horsepower, and I laugh because in Europe there's a 12 liter, sorry, a 12 cylinder 4.5 liter, you know, pushing 670 horsepower. And I'm like, how come everybody's on these big block 5.7 liter, 6.4 liter stupid American V8s, right? Like it doesn't do, the math doesn't work out. It just doesn't, and this is why I don't like domestics. This is really why I don't like domestics, is because unless it's been Europeanified, it's all ego and it's all stories from the heydays, which aren't relevant anymore. I got a Hornet here. It's 2-liter. It's pushing, whatever it is, 263 or something like that, right? Modern 2-liter, 250 horsepower. It's more than 100 horsepower per liter. I remember when the Honda Accord came out in the 90s there. Was it the naturally aspirated 6? I think it was. And it was pushing 199 horsepower was their sales quote in a Honda Accord, right? My point about this is my point about this is these little engines are the modern day versions of hot rods. So when I see like a Honda CRV and I go blah, there's a reason, because they don't make a sporty version of it. When I see a Toyota RAV4, and I've known this about Toyota since I started selling them, is that they actually don't make sporty versions of anything, and they haven't for a couple of decades. They haven't. They have been putting on body kits, but they have not been upgrading suspension. They have not upgrading the motor to make it sporty. All they're doing is adding like wings and body kits, like fake tuners do to their sporty cars. Look, Toyota has not put out a sporty car since the LFA and the Supra. That's it. Anything else is not sport. It's not. However, the Honda has been, I think the Honda Accord even had it. They upgrade the suspension so that, it is sportier. Volkswagen GTI, GTR, GLS, Jettas. Like it's very, Sentra came in at the last minute across the finish line with their R, Sentra R spec or whatever it's called, which wasn't actually a fantastic vehicle. And if you have one, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't have one, find one. They're probably bagged and rusted and got 400,000 kilometers on them. But sporty versions of boring cars are the hot rods. Doesn't matter what era you come from, it really doesn't. Because that's how the hot rod thing started. It was a sporty version of some boring car, and it doesn't have to be a big V8. It doesn't have to have the styling from the 60s or 50s or whatever, whenever they started that, right? It's just finding the actual bones of the car to be sporty. I mean, back in the day, they didn't upgrade suspension or tires or anything. They just threw the big engine in it. And then with that big engine and the solid iron frames of the cars of the day, they could build on that. Modern cars are different, right? Like it's all monocoque and glued and composite and for fuel efficiency mostly. So it's very difficult to put together a car that can be called a hot rod, really. And I used to have friends that did that, and they did make some fun cars, and they used to give them to me to drive and test, sort of thing, right? And I'd report back, and they would make changes or not, and I would get in trouble sometimes because of driving the car like I wasn't supposed to, outside of manufacturer specifications. But overall, you know, I'm not a tuner. I don't like to work on cars so much. I'm not real into the mechanic thing. I can do it and I enjoy it doing maintenance things, but to build a car is kind of out of my thing. I have dreams about it. It might be a thing. I don't know. It's not a real thing. It's not something I do every day. However, there it is other people's things. I'm just saying I like to buy sporty versions of manufacturer specified sporty cars because those are the true hot rods. If that makes sense. If that makes sense, hit the like button. And that's kind of where I'm going with this. And that's why I say I like to drive sporty versions of boring cars because that's where the juice is, that's where the squeeze is, that's where the fun is. Driving around in some nondescript car that can pull a corner that will actually bend your brain for a little bit, make you think. That's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm not saying, yeah, sure, it'd be nice to go out and buy some McLaren, purpose built car. But and I've said it before in videos, it's not the thing. Those cars end up sitting. You can't drive them everywhere. Going over speed bumps is difficult. And a lot of them putting gas in is difficult. But you get to have fun every day in a sporty version of a boring car, which is what the hot rod era inspired. And it was from manufacturers. It really didn't come from, well, might have come from the people, but the people latched onto it when they started to make them like that. Tell me what you think in the comments. I appreciate your viewership. Thanks for tuning in, Ryan and Cars. If you're new, I talk about cars, topics like this. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.